Hey guys, welcome to my Nekros guide. I'm going to try to make this short and sweet. Um, this utilizes Nourish like every other build I've done recently. And Nourish is going to be there for damage on your weapons, for enemy debuffing, and since he also has Armor Strip as part of his kit, altogether this should be pretty good. I'm going to be utilizing mostly my melee weapon, although this is better without a melee build, but my melee weapon happens to restore health and energy for me. Yeah, once we've killed a bunch of enemies, we could start by applying our damage reduction. Activate Nourish again. Yep, and now what we need to do is start killing enemies to try to get health orbs to try to get our health up. Once we have our health up a little bit more, everything's gonna be much easier. Occasionally we want to also recast our force so that we can restore health to our minions. And as we pick up health orbs, we're going to get more health. Once that happens, I'm going to start also activating my third ability, which is going to increase loot. Meanwhile, if I do it right now, I'm in trouble because whenever I kill enemies, my health drains a little bit because of combat discipline. It's not always good to use the armor strip because it also makes enemies run away, and it's not necessarily something you always want to happen. Yeah, and try not to run out of your 4. Otherwise that can happen. I'm notoriously bad at both playing and doing all that at the same time, so that's why you're seeing me failing this bad. Yeah, let's start activating, actually. This might help us gain more health orbs. Yep. Now, if you're not going to be using this melee, or any melee that gives you lifesteal, which is the thing I'm using, lifesteal on heavy attacks, instead what you could do is, I'm going to later show you, you're able to use... Oh, and then again I forgot to use my 4 again. Yep, you're going to use lifesteal on heavy attacks on your melee weapon, whichever one you're going to be using. That's going to help you deal with the health, but otherwise, there's an operator arcane you might consider using that does essentially the same thing when you go out into operator and back into your warframe. Then you essentially gain 300 health back, and you could just keep doing that, cycling that to get your health. But once you have a pretty decent health buffer like I'm having right now, then you're going to be able to deal with pretty much everything that comes your way, even the Acolyte, which I was hoping would show up soon. And look how easily we can deal with this guy. Yeah. Bye-bye Acolyte. Cast Fear again. Renew my 4. And I need to keep remembering to use Nourish. It's going to help us with our energy regeneration, especially with the melee weapon, but also just from random orbs dropping around. Yep, okay, so I guess let's leave and I'll explain what's going on here. So, loot frames are really nice, and especially if you can sustain yourself like I'm doing right here, that's pretty great. The melee weapon is not necessarily, as I said, part of this build. You could do this with any type of weapon, but then again, you're going to have to closely follow your health pool and make sure to regenerate your health by whatever operator arcane you have, or in my case, Arcane Grace also helps with that. But here's the build in a nutshell. Arcane Grace is going to help us get our health back once we have a decently sized health pool, which we're going to eventually have thanks to Arcane Blessing. Arcane Blessing is going to add up to, like, I believe, above 1,300 health, somewhere around maybe 1,500 health, maybe more. I've never actually done the calculation. But we're going to use that as our buffer because we're going to be losing health from combat discipline and from the spoil. But we're going to mitigate a bunch of the damage that we're taking. This is basically a tank build. We're going to be mitigating a bunch of the damage thanks to Shield of Shadows, which with the amount of ability strength that we're using in this build is going to give us 90% damage redirection, which is the maximum at 7. So the damage redirection you see here of 14%, that's per thrall, and you can have a maximum of 7 thralls. So if you do the math, it's going to be above 90%, but since it's capped at 90%, it's going to be 90%. And to cover the 10% to make us even more tanky, we're going to be using Adaptation, which essentially is another stacking 90% damage reduction. So if you stack that on, if we take 10% damage instead, if let's say an enemy deals 1,000 damage to us, 90% of that damage is going to be mitigated from Shield of Shadows, so we're only going to take 100. And then if Adaptation is stacked all the way, instead of 100, we're going to only be taking 10 damage. So it's essentially a 99% damage reduction in the best case scenario, which is very easy to maintain, actually. And in addition to this, your thralls are also going to help pull enemy fire on them because they have a higher threat level than players do. So enemies prioritize Shadows of the Dead thralls. Yep, and the rest of the build is essentially just for damage and loot. Desecrate is obviously just there for the loot. It also helps using Equilibrium to restore your energy and stuff like that, and your health, which is essential because, again, we're going to be... Sorry about that if you can hear that noise outside. Somebody's dragging something. Back to the video. Sorry, I'm not gonna edit this. Nourish is going to increase our energy intake and give us a flat damage increase to our weapons and add viral to our weapons, meaning we don't have to mod our weapons to viral, saving us 2 mod slots, which we could increase critical and other stuff instead, which is what we're doing. Terrify is going to be there for the armor reduction, meaning that against Grenier, you're pretty much going to just slash them to death super easily with a combination of Terrify and Nourish together. You can deal with any enemy that comes your way. As you've seen what it does to Acolytes, it's very, very easy. Eventually, I suppose, since the damage doesn't scale that much to level 9999 enemies, eventually the millions of damage you deal with a buffed up Nourish and Terrify heavy attack with your melee weapon or whatever weapon you'll be using, if that's not enough to kill them, well, at least Shadows of the Dead does create minions that have some kind of damage scaling because they are the level that the enemies are. So the higher level the enemies are, the higher level these guys are going to be, up to the level cap, I suppose. Yep, and this is, again, clearly just there to increase your loot. This Warframe is just going to be something that you play generally for many missions, just so you'll be able to kill enemies and get better loot on the way. The reason we're prioritizing melee weapons is for a variety of reasons. I'm going to show my melee weapon just a little bit. But use any melee weapon that focuses on slash. That's obvious. Why? Because slash has a chance to mutilate the opponent, and if the opponent is mutilated and cut in 2 or 3, then it counts as 2 or 3 corpses respectively for the purposes of desecrate. And that's going to be very useful. So, of course, the more you can mutilate the enemies, the better, and a melee weapon is just a very reliable way to get that accomplished. And this is the melee weapon we've chosen to build, the Syath, and as I've showcased in a previous video, so I'm not going to go too much into depth about it. What this allows us to do, this is a Zaw, so it allows us to use Exodia Brave. So on heavy attack we gain energy regen, and Life Strike, which on heavy attack will heal us so that we can get our health back. So we get our health back, we get our energy back. But if that wasn't enough, the energy that we get back is multiplied by Nourish. And the same applies to the orbs that we pick up with Equilibrium. So if we pick up a health orb, we get 110% extra energy out of it. So that would be 210% of the energy. And then you multiply that by at least 3.4, and you get the picture. And the same thing applies to Exodia Brave, where you have 5 energy times 3 per 4 seconds. So that's 15 energy per second times 4, that's 60. 60 times 3.5, let's say times 3, that's 180 energy after 4 seconds. Which is really, really not bad. That's way more than you would ever need, and it's enough to fill your entire energy pool, since we're not really using any, we're not using Primed Flow or Archon Flow. Ideally, I'm not using any Archon Shards on this yet, but if I would probably add at least 2 blue ones on plus 50 max energy to give him a total of plus 100 max energy. At least one. He needs at least one to get it above the 200 threshold. That would allow you to cast more than one spell. As for the rest of the build, we're going to need duration because of Nourish, and that's practically the only reason we're going to be needing duration. It also helps a little bit with Shadows of the Dead, but what we really need is we need it for a decently long Nourish, so that we won't have to recast this every single second. And yep, we already start with 100% damage, armor reduction, from Terrify. We start with 90% damage reduction from Shield of Shadows, so that we can start every mission at top condition, rather than, let's say, replacing Arcane Blessing with Molt Augmented to go for even higher ability strength. In this build, we're not really opting for more than what we already have as our base ability strength, because this amount of ability strength is more than enough to cover decent damage increase from Nourish, a decent energy multiplier from Nourish, and what this build could use more is range, but unfortunately we're constrained by the mod slots, and since we decided to trust most of our health, max health and health regen to arcanes, so that we can focus on more mods. We're going to need this because we're using adaptation to mitigate more damage, which is pretty crucial. And we're using 2 augments, which is also going to be costly when it comes to mod slots. So this is pretty much the best I could figure out what to do with the tools that I had at my disposal and with the slots that I had free at my disposal. But yeah, this is going to be my tanky Nekros build that can also easily deal with all enemies in all Steel Path levels pretty much. Have a nice day, guys.